As we've previously seen, there's many types of biases. So when we look at a question, always look at it with a very critical lens. So what can we do in order to reduce bias? So the best thing is to collect a random sample. So choose one of the good sampling methods we talked about before: a simple random sample, a stratified sample, a cluster sample, or a systematic sample. Also, make sure you select enough individuals. So have a large enough sample size so that we can make sure that we have good results. So we call that replication. If your sampling method is flawed, taking more people into your sample will not reduce bias. This is what we talked about when we looked at the bad sampling technique. So if you have a self-response or a non-response or convenience sample, then even increasing our sample size will not make our results better. Let's dive a little deeper into sampling techniques. What type of sampling bias do we have? First of all, we have undercoverage, when some groups in the population are left out of the process of choosing the sample. So in a census, that could be leaving out the homeless population. But there's many other examples. So maybe if we collect data and we go to different houses and we only survey during the day when people are at work, we may miss the entire, population of working families, working parents, working moms and dads. So that also could lead into undercoverage. And oftentimes we want to really look at who is being left out by the way we're choosing our sample. Another type of sampling bias is non-response bias. We already looked at that previously. So when an individual who was chosen for the sample can't be contacted or refuses to cooperate. So in our example before, someone was sending out questionnaires, but less than half of the questionnaires were returned. Again, this would be non-response bias because we are only capturing less than half of our sample. And again, the people who responded to our survey may feel very differently than the people who did not respond. So that's non-response bias. Last one is response bias. This is where the behavior of the respondent or the interviewer influences the outcome. So this could be how the question is worded. So the way you word a question often has a huge impact on the response. It could be the order of the question. It could be, sensitive questions. And so depending on how the question is phrased, a person may respond one way or another. Sometimes the respondent is not comfortable with a question, so they may even be lying. All that falls within the response bias. One example of response bias was in a previous semester, some of my students were asking their classmates or other people on campus certain questions, and they actually just asked for verbal responses. So they didn't even have a questionnaire where people could, fill it out on their own and then fold it up and return it. But they actually asked students, what is your grade point average? And they noticed that most students that they questioned had a grade point average of 3.5. So again, the way they collected their sample and collected their data made it so a lot of people were not truthful. One thing you can do to reduce some of the response bias, maybe if the question order has an influence, would be to make different questionnaires where you reverse the order of the questions. This is often done for elections where our candidates are listed in different orders to make sure that the order of the candidates doesn't affect the way people vote. And then you can read through the question below that and the comic on the page.